grow older and you have kids, and maybe even when you run a company for a while, you lose all sense of time, and time has no meaning anymore, because what used to seem like a year now it seems like 10, and vice versa.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out on my end, living in New York, how much that just warps one's sense of time. Mm-hmm. This is going to sound really cheesy and cliche, but I honestly think Donald Trump has completely destroyed any sense of time that I have.
Yeah, me too. He's warped everything.
Everything feels like yesterday and a million years ago all at the same time.
Yeah, it's unfortunate we've given him that much power over us at so many different levels, but yeah, I guess I never really thought about how he's distorted the space-time continuum, but hey, whatever, he did that too.
It feels like he's got the Infinity Gauntlet.
Yeah. What a bad guy. He really is a bad guy. He's our Hitler, basically.
God, there's something today. Oh, there were two things I saw today. There was something about, and we won't make this a political podcast, but obviously we got to get this out of the way at the top.
Yeah.
One of them was there was some sort of edict from the White House of them making sure that all of the embassies, there was that, mm-hmm. which was really good, but all the embassies, none of them could fly rainbow flags.
Oh.
And then there was the USS McCain.
No, but I mean, the rainbow flag is more offensive. Way more offensive than McCain. Whatever. That's just a political rival.
The McCain thing was just like, what a silly dipshit we have for president.
What a silly dipshit.
Like every time you hear something and it's like, it is kind of amusing, like what just a petty piece of garbage he is.
Yeah.
But since the last time we spoke, you've become a television celebrity.
Oh man. Begrudgingly, that seems to be, I mean, like, begrudgingly or not, it's double-edged, but yeah, that is a thing that probably I get the most recognition for. And I say double-edged, go back and forth. Obviously, positive edge is it allowed us to do a lot of great, a lot of work with a big client and bring in a nice amount of revenue for the business, which helps keep us going on other things. The negative is that the work I want to be most known for? Is that the work I want to be most visible connected with my company? Probably not. And then a positive is that people that I know tend to see it a lot, so they're reminded of my existence, which is, of course, like one of our biggest fears, and why we all stay on social media is we're afraid that everybody's going to forget us if we're not constantly updating and posting. So that's nice. And basically anytime I ever see anybody who I haven't seen for a while, they're telling me I was I was visiting my parents in Waukegan, or I was on a business trip in a hotel, or I was at a sports bar and I saw you and I said, "There's Adam." And I realized people get really excited about it, and that's nice. So that's a big plus for me. It's a way for me to like remind all the people that I love that I'm still there and I love them still.
I don't watch a lot of television. I cut the cord many, many years ago. There was a point that, crossed over from like, oh, that's interesting, Adam's on TV, to Adam is on TV all the time.
Yeah. And I don't really get a good sense of that on a sort of like a bigger cultural level. What it means. Obviously there are like these known spokesfigure type characters that, like the Verizon guy or Flo from Progressive, all of these, the Kellogg's Frosted Flakes tiger.
He's recognized every time he walks down the street.
All these people, and they're like sort of known cultural figures. But I think that I have no way of knowing what I represent or who I am in the zeitgeist or the public sort of like consciousness. I don't know whether it's like, oh, that's a character who represents this brand, or, oh, it's kind of like this amorphous blob of a bearded man who's on commercials that I see all the time. And it's kind of funny because people don't often remember what the commercial is that they see me on. It's just like, on the car thing, the car thing. You're you do CarMax, right?
Or even, yeah, exactly. or even if they do get that, I mean, this was something I was talking to Hannibal about because, he's actually legitimately like famous, but he's still at that level where he had crossed over from being a stand-up to being like in movies sometimes and I'm fascinated with this level of fame of the vague recognition and maybe they do recognize you from a commercial, or maybe they thought they went to high school with you.
Right, exactly. Yes. It's funny that in between level of fame, especially with somebody like Hannibal, because to comedy people, he's a god. So that means anytime he's out in public and somebody does recognize him and knows him by face and by name, they're at a level of adoration.
And this is something I think that he struggles with as much or more than most. You know, obviously we can't pick the things we're famous for, and he's famous as the Cosby guy.
Oh, bummer.
That's kind of what broke him in a way. Like, he was like against us, like, you know, New York, LA comedy nerd people knew who Hannibal Buress was, but then he did the Cosby thing.
Yeah, I remember.
And then that kind of rocketed him to fame. So, you know, you want to be grateful of the fact that people maybe recognize you, or at least like appreciate what you do in some respect, but you can't really choose the context in which they approach you.
Yeah, definitely. You're right. There's some stigma to that fame because of that, you know, the spark that ignited it. Ultimately, of course, it was positive, but is that the thing he wants to be known for? I'm sure it's not. It's funny though, like, you know, I was kind of like, I first gained public recognition in a very marginal context in the tech community. So, you know, WWDC was just a few days ago, and I went up to San Jose and I went to the Layers conference, was an alternate design conference that goes on at the same time. So I go in that community, you know, mostly to see friends, mostly to sort of like be in that environment of like, let's celebrate the intersection of tech and creativity again. But that is the one context where I am a famous person. And it's super fun for me and slightly alarming that if I go to the live talk show, if I go to the talk show, you know,
to Gruber's,
Gruber's thing, and there's like a line down a couple of blocks outside the theater, and I walk past and, you know, there's like a lot of side glances because, you know, most of those people in line kind of know who I am, and that's super fun. I've been on, you know, Gruber's show and stuff, but also like maybe they know me from Sandwich, or maybe they know from You Look Nice Today, maybe they know from Computer Show. That is where, if there's one place in the world where I get to feel like that sort of level of marginal famous, that's it. And then I leave that environment, and it's an environment where people come up to talk to me, which feels great. You know, people come up and they tell me what they like about me, and then they listen to what I say for a while. And what can really be better for confidence or just for the ego than that? And then I come away from that after a couple of days. I come home, and my kids don't care. My partner does not care. The folks at the office don't care about that stuff.
You're also just like, where were you? Like, where was my wife or girlfriend when all these people are around? Because that would be nice.
Oh yeah,
you know, that would be nice to be like sitting at a restaurant and have somebody come up to you and have you sign something.
That is pretty dope. And my favorite moment of recognition, not to name drop, but it was years and years ago when I was doing Put This On, that web men's style series with Jesse Thorne, and my partner Roxana was doing her own style website called Nerd Boyfriend. It was around 2010, 2011 maybe, and we went to go see a screening, like the premiere screening of the movie Mystery Team, which is the Derek comedy film. And then after this screening, we're all standing out on the street, and Donald Glover is out there. And even at that point, I mean, obviously Donald Glover is Donald Glover, super mega superstar now.
He was always a shooting star, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it was clear that he was going to make it.
But back then, we all knew he was a god.
Yeah.
So he's standing there on the sidewalk after the show. Roxana and I are about to go back to our car and leave because we're awkward. And then he looks over at both of us and he says, "Put This On and Nerd Boyfriend, right?" And we just nearly shat our pants. I mean, we like shat each other's pants. And then he came over and we chatted with him for a while. I got his cell phone number. He invited us to a party. And then the friendship disbanded very quickly from that.
You were done with him. You got what you needed out of that relationship.
But it's kind of like that's the most gratifying thing that's ever happened fame-wise. And I feel like I'm done. You know,
how does one reluctantly get on camera? Obviously, you've been doing the production for a while. You had been doing it for a while before that. You've got some interest in, at the very least, being in front of a microphone. You know, you'd been doing the podcast for a while, but it sounds like you kind of got pulled into that kicking and screaming a little bit.
Yeah, not necessarily kicking and screaming, except that I never assumed that I would be the best one to do it. Just like I didn't, my assumption with like something like "You look nice today," it was like a reluctance to the degree that I always thought that I was the weakest one of the trio. Like I was, I'm kind of and I'm sure a lot of people who adore, appreciate comedy can identify with this, is that feeling of being in a circle of really funny people and you're just kind of there to watch. And like, you don't
feel like you're treading water sometimes.
It's really hard to like always have the confidence and the clarity of mind to think of the witty thing to say right then and there, and then the confidence to say it. So you kind of always like take the back seat, and that's okay. And that's sort of like part of your identity. And so I was kind of always that guy. And that the thing about being that guy or that person is that you don't assume that you should be the one on camera. You should be front and center character, that everybody's supposed to be looking at for 90 seconds. So it was always just this hesitation around the idea that I just didn't think that I didn't think that I would be the most compelling person. And it wasn't really until, the first couple of videos that clients asked me to be that I started to sort of, reluctantly believe them that for whatever reason, I could be a character that can be trusted with this information and trusted to convey this information. And it was a pretty different persona than the one that I'd been doing on my podcast with Scott and Merlin. Cause that guy was a little bit more, again, back of the room, kind of like saying every so often saying the odd, witticism or something, or, but I definitely wasn't dominant. So this new character that I started doing with Sandwich was just the guy who's like a little bit awkward, but he's there for a purpose and he's there to say a thing, and he says the thing and then moves on.
The word character is really strange from the standpoint of, you're essentially describing clearly two different parts of yourself. I mean, you were being yourself with Scott and Merlin. Mm-hmm. And it looks like, I don't know you well, but we've interacted a number of times. It seems like you're pretty much being yourself on camera as well.
Sure. But you hit it on the mark. There are so many facets to every person, and you choose at any point what to reveal.
But character implies some artifice.
I guess it does, but I would sort of like, I'd up that a little bit by saying that everything is artifice. Anything that is not internal is artifice.
And you live in Los Angeles and you make videos for a living, so you're very keen.
Right. And I think that the artifice is less about like the additive participation. It's more about the subtractive participation in that you're choosing, especially, with things like a podcast that you edit or these commercials that you shoot and do many takes. You're really like cultivating what it is you don't want people to see. And trust me, especially in the beginning when I was cutting everything, you see a lot of stuff about yourself that you don't want people to see. So artifice in the sense that you're in real time, in real time, you don't get very much opportunity to edit and remove the parts of yourself that you'd prefer people don't see. But anything like this, like the podcast we're recording now or the commercials they make, you get that chance to really like hone it and make it right. And the funny part is that people don't know the difference. People on the other side of this experience don't know that if you've done your job right, they don't know that it's been edited at all. And that's why we have cultures of celebrity, is because people assume that the highly curated and edited versions of the people that they like are the true versions of those people, and not, very cultivated.
I suspect part of the reason why, when you were dealing with clients, you were talking to them about production and they, zeroed in on something, is that, is that there's a realism there, that there's something real about you as a person, that you're not a Kardashian. You know what I mean? You're not somebody who is like been necessarily working their entire life to be on screen, and that is clearly part of the appeal.
Yeah, there's a lot hanging out. There's like a lot of rough edges, and there's not a highly visible evidence of trying to make perfect.
Trying too hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause that's sort of like, you look at I apologize for, using the example of Kardashians because it feels like why give them more attention, but the Kardashians are the perfect example of like what it looks like when an image is perfected for consumption.
Yeah.
And I could say to your point that I'd probably represent the opposite of that, because even from the first videos, like the first one to launch Square, I hadn't shaved, I hadn't gotten a haircut, I just sort of wore whatever, my shirt was wrinkled, and I guess that at that point there was something refreshing about somebody who like hadn't tried to, perfect the image.
Clearly you had some interest in something performative from the standpoint of doing a podcast of these other things. Even though you were reluctant, or at least it was unexpected, have you learned to enjoy that aspect of things?
Yeah, I do. I enjoy it a lot more than I used to be on set and like be in front of a room of people and try to have to do the dialogue. I think I used to sweat it a lot more, especially when there's a bigger crew and you're trying to remember your lines and you're feeling like, okay, I'm supposed to be saying something that's sort of funny. Nobody in here is laughing. My self-confidence sort of like gets chipped away take by take by take. And that's something that, you're sort of like, you're giving too much power to that feedback loop in that context.
I suspect that that's probably one of the hardest things about being a porn actor is it's like, it just seems like the least sexy situation you can be in.
Yeah. Well, in that instance, I think you would have to forget that anybody else is there in the room, or God, I think that there's just like a whole set of skills and tools that adult performers use that I would have no idea.
Sure.
I wouldn't even be able to guess at how they get good at what they do.
I mean, how did those conversations go early on, though, of somebody just kind of floated the idea of you versus, was there a financial aspect of it? Was it not wanting to necessarily like pay a professional? I mean, and this as well as anyone, but you get paid a lot of money to be in those spots.
Well, not for non-union jobs, but no, financial was never a consideration. In fact, it's kind of the inverse correlation. It's the client usually pays more for me to be in the thing than they would just to pay an actor. But, you just have to consider what the added value is of having me, who's this sort of like known entity, representing and endorsing the thing. Early on, it was really it was sheer luck of having put myself on camera to promote my own app. And then that being the evidence that Jack Dorsey needed to want me to be on camera for his app. And then the outcome of that, video being the evidence that Flipboard needed to put me on camera for their app. And that just kind of snowballed in that way. And it took really like 3 videos for me to cement that thing. And then what I learned early on after, I got an email from Apple, like the head of the motion and video group at Apple, right after those first couple of videos. We got on the phone and we talked for like 2 hours, and he said that there might be an upcoming project that, they'd be curious about having my involvement on. And then he, so we talked for a bit, and then he said he'd get back in touch. And then what I learned much later on, it went away, the opportunity. What I learned much later on was that they were considering me to be sort of like, at the time, the iCloud guy, like introducing, or it might have even been Mobile Me at that point, or me.com, to sort of like teach people what that was, that whole ecosystem. But internally it was determined that I had already sort of like worked with other startups, so Apple didn't want to be seen as.
Interesting. So you were too much of a known quantity at that point.
Yeah. Which was interesting to me.
I mean, I'm sure you've had this conversation with Hodgman at some point. I wonder if I've never talked to him about this directly. Like you, he's different than a lot of, again, like your Flo or the woman who does AT&T commercials, and that like, he
he's
wasn't
not just an actor.
He wasn't going his way to be a commercial actor necessarily.
Right, yeah.
But he's clearly moved beyond that at this point. But he was the Mac guy for a long time.
Yeah.
And it must be difficult to kind of weigh the positive successes of that with what it means to the rest of your career.
Right. Yeah. You kind of wear it as an overlarge badge for a while. And, I think he'd probably say the same thing that I do about TrueCar, which is that it allowed him to do so many other things. It's great for your confidence and it's great for your career, and to the extent that you want to be famous because everybody kind of wants to be famous. It allowed him to do that for a while. But he already had this career as like a thinker and a writer and a comedian, and he was correspondent on The Daily Show and all of these things. So I'm sure he saw it at the time as this is just a vehicle to extend his career in that way. And it's up to you whether you consider that a burden or a blessing. And I think he would, as well as just as anyone would, Flo or whoever, they would consider it a blessing at the end of their life. And net, it all comes out like on top.
How much of the sort of that those early days, those first few videos, was really kind of being in the right place at the right time? I mean, it sounds like things cascaded. You're mentioning for early projects, you're mentioning Twitter and Flipboard. Subsequently, two of the most successful and Square. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I never worked with Twitter.
Even like having had that conversation with Jack early on, like clearly you were where you needed to be.
Yeah. Absolutely all luck. 100%. 100% luck.
Where were you and what were you doing that you got on these people's radar so early?
I was working in visual effects. I had gone to film school.
These are all really like anonymous things though. I mean, visual effects, right? Like who knows visual effects people?
I didn't even consider myself a director or a filmmaker anymore. I'd kind of like, I'd come to terms with not having the personality that could, take that level of authorship or, the confidence to do that, because I didn't have what I saw directors around me have. So I was working in post-production, which is, like you said, a very anonymous backseat type of a job. But I did get really excited when Twitter came around, when Web 2.0 came around.
That is a phrase that I've not heard in a very long
isn't
time.
It?
But
I mean, it's just...
When things first started being dynamic.
And, I always think about, at the time, anybody interested in Web 2.0 technologies, we had the term Ajax to describe like what Flickr did, which is like that it would load new visual data from, without reloading the page, which is pretty cool. That's when the web came alive. So I just got really excited about that and started dreaming up like, what are other tools that people could use? I didn't even know the word startup. It was just like, oh, I want to start a website,
You were in LA at the time?
Yeah. I was in LA. I'd been here working in post for a while, and just being fascinated with that tech. And also when Apple was still an underdog, pre-iPhone, but it was clear that there was a trajectory there.
Jobs was back.
And Jobs was back. There was a lot of design attention being paid to every single product they came out with. And I just joined this community of obsessives who loved talking about the stuff that was going on in technology. And again, this is all pre-iPhone. So when I started getting interested in tech, at some point it surpassed my interest in media and in movies and commercials and stuff. It all just surpassed that. So, and then the iPhone came out and it blew everybody's mind. Yeah, somebody on my team, JP on my team, his dad has been working in a tech environment for decades, and apparently just took JP by surprise by making this pronouncement that the iPhone was maybe the most important invention of all mankind. And which, I mean, that's a pretty significant thing for somebody that, who's been working in it for that long.
And knew what penicillin was.
Yeah. Good, very good point. Anyway, it was that transformative that it felt like now that was the time to say, okay, let's rethink what we want to do with our lives. And then it was just pure accident that my entry point, I'd sort of met a lot of people in that community because I was expressing the same level of fixation that they were, and an appreciation of comedy and appreciation of just wisecracking on the internet, which comedians
Twitter worked for
right, which is comedians weren't doing that yet. Yeah. So it was just the tech nerds that were doing it. And so the community formed around those two things, comedy and tech. And then, so I met all those people, and then my way into working in the tech universe was to make little videos about tech. And that is really just, that wasn't intentional. It was just accidental. it was like, let me use the skills and the tools that I know to say things that I want to say about technology that's developing around us. And not a lot of people were doing that in the same way. So that's what got me the attention. And before I knew it, it was like, oh, I could actually do this for a living.
I mean, I think the idea at that point, the idea of having a commercial that would exist only online was still relatively novel.
Yeah, it totally was. Now that you put it like that, because, and what was the differentiating about it was like paying the attention, giving it the level of production quality that a TV commercial would have, but with a low budget and destined for the web.
I mean, it was absolutely a precursor to Kickstarter, right? I mean, that was the lesson that they learned, was that the production of that video is so important to the success of a project.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because they put it front and center in the most interesting way. I mean, what they were doing is fascinating, because Vimeo was first, right? Vimeo was the first, like, truly, almost, you can't really say native because so was YouTube, but Vimeo was the video destination whose purpose was truly for showcasing the best of video, of digital video.
Yeah. I mean, I was discussing this with somebody recently, because they actually had a really big ad campaign. I don't know if it's out here too, but in New York, they like plastered all over the place.
Yeah, we don't really see that out here because I mean, Vimeo is a New York company.
Yeah, I was asking a coworker actually where Vimeo stood right now, because in the way that like Google became catch-all search and internet, like YouTube just became catch-all video. They're still trying to go after, I think, that kind of creator space, but I just don't know if that specialized category really makes a lot of sense now.
I mean, I think it makes sense still. I think it'll just always be more marginal than they wish it were. Than just like wishing that Vimeo could capture more of the market than 10%, let's say, is like wishing that the most interesting content was generated by more than 10% of the people. Yeah. It's never going to be, because that's the fact of humanity, Sure. Less than 10% of people make the most interesting things.
Yeah. I don't know. The content revolution or whatever has been wonderful from the standpoint of the ability of everybody being able to create stuff and, obviously marginalized voices being able to be heard, but it's got to be, for somebody who has spent so much, blood, sweat, and tears in making the best videos as possible, it has to be kind of rough on the psyche to see just really terrible videos like float up to the top. Where do you stand on like a Twitch? I think I'm too old to completely understand the appeal of it, but that's kind of the most popular video thing in the world right now, is people watching people play games.
Yeah, I'm too old to appreciate it or understand it as well. I don't think I've ever watched a Twitch feed or stream, but I don't really consider that video content. I just consider it like it's a different medium of information. So I don't really think they're comparable, and I couldn't get upset that right now in our culture, that kind of information medium is being given so much attention. I don't think I could get really upset. I could get upset if it was like all those people were watching, gross violence and sexual debasement.
Which, to be fair, is
that
absolutely...
what it is?
Well, no, that not specifically, but that is absolutely... Those are all very popular content forms.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the nature of the content that's being consumed could be troubling, but the fact that is a popular format of information, I couldn't get upset with, because people are going to learn however they learn, and we can define learning in so many different ways. Learning just doesn't just mean like sitting down and watching a short film, thank God, or like appreciating cinema. It doesn't just mean going to Vimeo and watching music videos and art films.
What you're making you're making commercials. I mean, you're making a commercial products. You're making a capitalist thing that is
100%.
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to make the best one you can, but it literally exists to sell people on a thing.
Yeah, and like our work can never be featured on staff picks for that reason, which is okay. That's fine with me. I mean, if there were a Vimeo for commercials, then maybe we would go after that kind of attention there, but I appreciate that that's not why Vimeo exists, and I appreciate that they stick to their principles in that way.
Is it, or can it be creatively fulfilling in the same way as making your own art film to be making a commercial? And especially when it sounds like you've got some freedom, but ultimately you're always working for a client.
Yeah, it can be that fulfilling, but I have nothing to compare it to. But I'm about to find out because I'm just about to shoot my first music video for the pure love of it, and not because anyone approached me or not because a label came to me, but because I've over the last year or two found a new fascination with or reconnected the music that I love, which is mostly jazz and the crossover of jazz and hip hop. And there is for many reasons.
I now understand why you and Jesse Thorne are friends.
Yeah. We've wrote out about music a lot. But just in terms of sheer musicianship, there's a lot going on right now in the world that I think probably like in the popular culture, people aren't really aware of unless they're like paying attention to artists like Kendrick Lamar. But especially around him, for instance, in LA, there's this universe of musicians that are doing mind-blowing next level stuff in terms of like blowing out the possibilities of the music that had never been achieved or possible prior to this generation. And it's fun to I've just had a few different conversations with people recently, friends who kind of like identify, and a lot of musician friends that identify that the tools have evolved to the point to allow people to make different kind of music, but also the output of that music has then fed back into the old school traditional analog musicianship, that in a way that you see performers, especially young performers out there, that are able to reproduce the chops of electronic musicianship, but using acoustic instruments. And also there's almost like there's a higher level of mathematical thinking about this music right now in terms of like harmonic possibilities that hadn't existed before. And if you go to
you sound like a prog guy right now.
No, seriously, I know. And I probably am of the wrong era, but this is such an exciting time to be paying attention to that music. So I discovered a couple of artists that are not only making that type of music, but are also directly in that Kendrick Lamar universe, that Thundercat universe.
Yeah.
And
Flying Lotus.
Yeah, Flying Lotus. And so I got in touch with them and I said, "Hey, I adore your music. It's blowing my mind. It's like nothing I've ever heard. And I want to make a film, like what would traditionally be called a music video, except jazz doesn't usually get this type of music video. So can I do that? Can I lend my resources to you and we make a film together? And you tell me what track you want it to be for." And so I met with them and they got super excited. And ever since then, it's been a lot of momentum, like bringing in crew that I usually work on the commercial stuff with. But these are crew that are incredibly, tremendously artful, creative, talented people, but they don't get to express all of that creativity in the commercials. So I get to like approach them and say, "Hey, let's work on something that's got no commercialism in it whatsoever. Let's just make something for the art and the love of it."
Is this through Sandwich?
Well, I mean, my production company is Sandwich, so that's who's going to be producing it.
It's that tough thing of asking people to like, "Hey, let's do a thing for the love of it."
Yeah, but honestly, people around here especially enjoy that opportunity probably more so than let's just work on this commercial because we have to and because it pays the bills. We all pitched in and made this how to vote video with Demi Adejuyigbe come midterm election time, and it was the most fun anybody in this company has had working on anything.
Question isn't why you want to do it. I mean, that's obvious, but the question is, I guess, what took so long? Why are you finally now doing something just for the sheer fun of it?
I mean, if you want to get deep about it, there's a lot. I'm 41 and there's a lot of transformation going on in my life right now.
These are the things, that most creative people are exploring pretty early on.
Sure. Yeah.
And you sort of jumped headlong into capitalism.
For sure. 'Cause capitalism is where the money.
Sure. You live in Los Angeles. I mean, it makes sense. And I did too. I had to make tough decisions early on of writing for myself versus, going to these publications, and I ended up on the latter side of things. I guess it makes sense from the standpoint of like you can finally afford yourself the ability to do this. I mean, you have the resources to do it.
Yeah, for sure. That's the reality of it. But also, I don't mind having spent 6 years working in visual effects, learning skills, and then 10 years running this company because I did get pure joy out of it. It's not like, commercials such a drag. It's actually unfortunate that commercials has that stigma. Certainly, when I went to film school, nobody talked about commercials, and I was there from 96 to 2000, and maybe people were talking about music videos being an interesting creative opportunity, but nobody was, in my circle anyway, was talking about, hey, explore your filmmaking through commercials. And now, I mean,
music videos had already had their moment. There was a while there where, like Michel Gondry, Spike Jonze,
sure.
like all of the great directors were being fed through music videos, but that had already probably come and gone by that point.
Yeah, it seemed to be really keeping to music videos and cinema without any intermediary between, through commercials. I don't think people, you've got the Cannes Lion and stuff like that. And sure, there's always kind of an awareness that some commercials can be clever and funny or really creative or make you cry. But at least, again, in my circles, nobody was really saying, as a filmmaker, I want to set out to learn how to make the best commercials and really triumph in the context of advertising. Nobody was really saying that I knew of, and certainly not in film school. So it wasn't until I got out here and started working in effects that suddenly, most of the jobs I was participating in or on set for were commercial jobs. And then it was fun to see behind the scenes that as much care and obsession can be put into all of those decisions in making a commercial as there would be in making a feature film or a music video or something. And when it comes down to it, if you like being obsessive about those things, then you're going to like your job. If your job is to be obsessive about commercials.
You're lucky from the standpoint that it sounds like, especially things picking up as quickly as they did, that you've been able to choose the people you work with. I mean, last time we spoke, that was very much the case at that point, where there were a lot more people asking you to do jobs than you were taking jobs.
Right. And again, it's just very lucky in that regard that still the main primary motivation of doing any job that we do is about, do we firmly believe that there's value in this product? Because if there's not, then there's no way to extract any value and translate it into filmmaking.
The business model has been interesting. I don't know if this is still the case, but I was going back and reading. This was the case when I spoke to you, and I was actually reading an interview Connie at our site did with you.
Yeah.
4 years ago now at this point. But the idea of equity is important in that, one, you have to believe that it's going to be a success in order to take equity from them. And two, you're going to invest more passion into a product if their success and ultimately the money you're making hinges on how successful your product is.
Yeah, that's about it. And we do that still. We don't do as much of it, certainly, as in the heyday of venture capital. But still, it's identifying the ones early on that are okay, they're just about to raise their Series A, or, they're launching and they're looking for opportunities to trade work for equity. I definitely don't get as many companies that are proposing that to me anymore. But it's I feel like the average is maybe 2 per year at this point, whereas it used to be closer to 10 per year of doing projects with an equity component. And a lot of that is just being more selective, because seeing so many of them that I felt had full, let's move, freight train momentum and promise, not materialize.
Sure.
So, you start looking at that as throwing money away. And I'm not a gambler. I don't like playing cards. I don't like playing games. I don't like investing. I don't like, speculating on the market. So I just want to be really, judicious about doing that kind of thing.
I've spoken to so many serial entrepreneurs, CEOs who are incredibly excited about that project, and it gets you really excited about it.
Oh yeah.
And you have to be, you absolutely have to be pragmatic. You understand, you begin to understand like why all of these companies are just pumping money into products and why they're like losing money hand over fist, is because it's really exciting and you want to be in on something from the ground floor, but it sounds like you got burned more than a few times.
Yeah, you start to believe stories. You know, like that's my job as a filmmaker, is to be a storyteller. So you look for the things in founders that are the things that you value, which is the ability to tell a good story.
Does that give you a better bullshit detector though?
No. I think I still believe a good storyteller now as much as I did 5-6 years ago. It's just that I have a little bit more awareness of the landscape and the market that I did back then. So you kind of like, if you hear a story now that you heard already 3 years ago, or you've heard a dozen different times, and you kind of like pick and choose what to ignore. But it's that thing, the phenomenon that you're talking about, the reality distortion field, is real. And when you come across a founder that has the ability to create that distortion field, it's powerful. You know, the power of a founder to tell a good story is the same as the power of a politician to tell a good story. And we want to believe these people, because who doesn't love good stories? We
got 8 years of Obama, and however you feel about how that turned out, like he was a good storyteller.
He was a beautiful storyteller. Yeah. Absolutely. And like it or not, Trump is a good storyteller too.
Yeah, he's just got a very different story to tell.
He tells horror stories.
I was going through the page, and Starbucks was a client. I mean, that's seems different than the normal startup.
Yeah, but it was almost like a little bit of an inflection point with the kind of clients we worked with being more like brands rather than products, because a lot of our clients, even at that time, that was like maybe 3 years ago, a lot of our clients were products that were discovering their brand.
What does that mean exactly?
So I'm a startup and I have a tech or an innovation or an idea that I need to turn into a product, put everything I have into that product, and I sort of like the brand is secondary to that. And
they didn't know what story to tell.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And that's sort of, that identifies like why a lot of them would come to us, is like help them tell the story of their product. So development of the brand is sort of secondary to that. But you're talking about Starbucks. They've already got, many decades of their brand story being told. And now they're a brand in search of a product, because they've got, innovator's dilemma. They need to figure out how to stay relevant and like refresh their stores and refresh the customer experience, and figure out how to keep themselves relevant constantly because of shareholders and whatnot. And so they have a whole digital marketing department, a digital product department, and they're the ones that come to us and say, like, we need people to know how our app works, and like why people who go to Starbucks every day but don't take out their phone, don't use the app, don't know it exists, we need to give them a reason to believe that the app is a better way to go to your Starbucks every day, and whatever. That brand came to us to tell their product story. And I think that represents more of the kind of work that we're doing at this point, is like they have a brand that everybody knows about already and an existing product, and they just need our help in sort of like translating the values of that product in ways people can understand them, that translates then to a lot of people clicking and buying and visiting the website and all, downloading the app, whatever it is.
So when you say it was an inflection point, you mean specifically for your company, that was when the transition moved toward where you're at now? Yeah, because it was like things had cooled off, I think, at that point, in terms of the speculation of like finding the next unicorn. Yeah, the venture capital seemed to be decreasing a little bit, like the heat. And then it was mostly about like, okay, so there are all these established brands out there, or, brands that are funded out there. And like the one thing that hasn't changed is nobody's saying like, oh yeah, video's not that important. Everybody still says video is important. And the definition of video changes, because video 5 years ago now means a 30-second spot on TV, but it's still video. Do you feel like you've become kind of a more traditional agency from that standpoint then, that you're working with more traditional clients? Yeah, for sure. A traditional agency, no. I think the definition of creative or ad agency is changing all the time by necessity, because
traditional big ad agency model isn't really, it's not necessarily able to adapt to what's happening in the product space.
It's kind of coming from both sides. So like in a sense, you are moving more towards the traditional in terms of the clients that you're working with. But on the flip side, maybe the rest of the world is kind of coming around to where you are.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say that, yeah, it's all circling around the same idea that, I guess what's changed most, we haven't changed all that much in terms of like our motivations and our process, not that much, but our creative and strategic process has become a lot more formalized than it used to be, because we used to absolutely undervalue the ideas behind the videos and sort of like throw that in as like a...
What's an example of that?
Well,
I mean, like from the standpoint of like, you know, maybe you would almost be kind of mocking it a little bit.
Not mocking it, no, not at all, but like not undervaluing it in the sense of like not believing that it's important, but forgetting to formalize it in a way that involved the client and indicated to not only to our client but to ourselves that we need to be putting a lot of attention into that process that gets us to the point where we have an idea that turns into a script. Whereas like we always had a script. You have to have a script when you shoot a video, unless it's a documentary or something or a testimonial. You have to have a script. And I always wrote scripts, but the first time I went to the Square office at the Chronicle building and I set up the camera and, you know, sat down and introduced Square. I wrote the script there in a conference room. I wrote it just, you know, jotted down this, handed it over. How does this look? These are the things I'm going to say because this is how I understand what Square is. Well, that piece right there, this is how I understand what Square is. And these are the words I'm going to use to explain that or, you know, to turn that into a video. That's not something you do in a conference room in a half hour. That's something that can take many, many months and millions of dollars.
I've seen there are actual whiteboards here now.
Yeah, right. And we don't our process is still very like, let's brainstorm and think it out and conversational. I've always had this sort of like fantasy, this weird outsider perspective on what happens at creative agencies, which is that, you know, you sit in the nest at Wyden Kennedy and you throw an idea ball back and forth and everybody's barefoot. And, you know, you've got like 16 people sitting in the roomatorium imaginating with their rain sticks and that's how good ideas come about. We have like, I guess, a version of that, which is that we're all fucking busy all day long. And then we have to carve out a half an hour in the day because we can't ignore it anymore. We have to sit in that, we call it the living room, just in the middle of our office there.
It does look like an apartment.
Yeah. It's got the warehouse vibe, the industrial brick and beams vibe. And we sit down and we just like talk about how we understand what the ideas are. Yeah. So I guess what's changed for us in terms of like maturing or growing up from a video production company into an actual creative agency is just like learning, telling the client that process exists and that it should be valued and that you should pay us for it because it's really important. And most of all, that's the thing that we do that not everybody else does.
You can't hand Starbucks a piece of binder paper ripped out of a notebook.
No.
Like it just won't work. I mean, maybe they appreciate your plucky charm, but there's a limit to that.
Right. I mean, I was like, we pitched one company that shall not be named, one of these direct to consumer brands a couple of years ago before we'd really gotten our shit together and figured out our pitch process and our decks and everything like that. I used to pride myself on like our creative process being that I or Josh, our writer, or somebody would write out a few paragraphs of text on a page, give it to them and say, this is our treatment. Do you understand the idea? Because if you like it, we'll turn this into a script. I prided myself on the efficiency of that. And then we got paid to develop creative by a direct-to-consumer brand. We brainstormed. We turned all that writing into, you know, a couple pages of text with a couple of images, put it in a PDF, handed it to them, and they decided to go in a different direction, finger quotes. And I asked the guy at the time, because I thought we were a lock, I asked the marketing guy, can we get on the phone? And, it'd mean a lot to me if you could explain to me why you went in a different direction, which is an opportunity you don't always get. It's very rare that a client takes you up on that.
You don't always feel comfortable asking.
I usually do. I usually do, but it's that thing where it's like a cold email. You think you're not going to get a response, and usually you're right. And then the clients who do respond, they exhibit such generosity in doing so, because it's very uncomfortable for them to say, like, this is actually...
You could put them in as awkward a spot as possible.
Right. It's like saying, why didn't you want to go on a date with me? Yeah. Okay, well, these are the reasons I found you unattractive. Yeah. That's a tangent. But I got on the phone with this guy, and he was okay. He was not great, but he said, I was like, why did we pay all this money for this piece of for a PDF? And it's like sort of took me aback, and I actually got sort of like defensive on the phone with him. And I said, well, you're not paying us to put together the most beautiful treatment document. You're paying us for the quality of the idea, but still, even that was disingenuous, because I knew what he was talking about. I knew, the thing that a client wants is they want to believe that you're giving this your full attention. But
even beyond that, he's got his bosses he needs to show it to.
Totally. So that's what can be frustrating, is sometimes in our creative process, you land on the first idea right away. You know that idea is the right one. It came to you first. And then you have to go through this futile exercise of developing 5 more ideas on top of that, just to justify the first idea.
Does working on the music videos, is that directly related to this sort of more formal process and the fact that you're working with clients that have stricter parameters to work within?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. There's nobody telling me what to do. And the artist is saying yeah, I want to sign off on what we shoot, but ultimately, I'm bringing my own resources to this. So I've even taken that out of the equation. If I develop this idea really far and then they say this doesn't feel right, then I don't have that much choice but to respond, to agree with them. Yeah, as we mature as an agency, yes, you're absolutely right. There's more constraints around what you can do. And there's the type of agency there's a type of big sort of extremely reputable creative agency out there. The 72 and Sunny, for instance, that big brands will go to spend millions of dollars for them, for that agency to take risks, creative risks, and do things that nobody was expecting, that is absolutely going to get attention because it was unique. But we're not that agency. None of our clients at this point are coming to us saying, blow it out, do something that nobody's expecting, be weird. You have total freedom, and here's a lot of money. Nobody's coming to us to say that. They're mostly coming to us to say, take the value that we know exists in our brand and our product and translate it in your unique way into something that performs really well for us. There's a lot of risk in there for our clients, because a lot of them are spending money they're not comfortable with spending. And so when they're agreeing or signing off on the creative that we develop for them, they're doing so with full faith that it's going to perform well. When you're working with those constraints, you don't get to take a huge amount of risk, and that can honestly make it a little bit more of a drag for us especially on the creative team. The producers working on, we've got a production department, creative department, a post department. The production department doesn't care quite as much about the creative risk taking as the creative department. The post department, there's still a lot of craftsmanship that goes on in their process, regardless of whether there's a ton of creative risk taking. But it's those of us that in this department, the creative department, that have to really study the brief and really make sure that we're adhering to the guidelines set out for what is going to perform well, what the market is going to respond the best to. And that's not technically how art is made.
There you go. That was the face of TrueCar.com, Adam Lonely Sandwich Lisagor. You can check out his stuff over at AdamLisagor.com and all of the sandwich videos over at SandwichVideo.com. Really enjoyed that conversation. Thanks so much to him for taking the time to do that. Thanks to you guys, as always, for listening to the program. If you like the show, there are a number of ways to support us. You can rate and review us on iTunes. We're on Google Podcasts and Spotify, YouTube now. Like us on Facebook. If you have any feedback, it's rolcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Tumblr. Yes, we are still on Tumblr at rolcast.tumblr.com. And that's about all I got for this week, so stick around because we're going to be back at just about this time next week with another episode of RIYL.